Did the UK pull a fast one on the EU, or did the coalition prosper despite the UK's exit? Brexit, the British withdrawal from the European Union, was considered one of the largest socio-political economic moves of the 21st century. It ended the UK's relationship with the coalition, effectively reducing it to 27 member states. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, not at all. Talks about leaving the EU had been going on for years, with people campaigning for an end to what they believed was an unreasonable and one-sided relationship with a coalition of European nations. In the end, with a majority vote during the 2016 referendum, the Leave campaigners got their way, i.e. Brexit. But was it in the best interest of the UK? Let's specify this. Was it in the best interest of the UK's economy? Or did Brexit inadvertently help improve the EU's economy? Economists weren't sure what would happen in 2020, but that didn't stop them from proposing a few possible outcomes. Today's video is about those possibilities and compares them to reality. What happened in a post-Brexit world, and who won? 51.89% of voters supported the idea of leaving the United Kingdom during the 2016 referendum. A small majority, but a majority nonetheless. It was decided that the UK would withdraw from the European Union in a move aptly termed Brexit. While those who voted to stay, the Remain group, believed that the UK was effectively plummeting into an economic black hole, those who voted to withdraw, the Leave group, couldn't disagree more. If anything, the EU could become one of the UK's biggest customers should it exit the single market. Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, claimed that Brexit needed to happen for the UK to form trade agreements with countries outside of Europe. Specifically, he argued that the UK needed to work on improving trade relations with the United States. He called Donald Trump the greatest ally in the world. Farage also claimed that once Brexit had taken place, it'd take the UK no more than 48 hours to come to a mutually beneficial, updated trade agreement with the United States. Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg also believed that it was in the UK's best interest to separate itself from an increasingly integrated Europe. They reminded everyone of the Eurozone crisis of 2009 and integrated policies under the EU that could harm the UK's economy. Even the Labour Party agreed that the UK needed to cut back on EU spending during 2013 budget negotiations. Some surveys also indicated that poorer regions in the UK were overwhelmingly in support of leaving the EU. That was because even if the UK's economy hadn't crashed while it was part of the coalition, rising costs and inflation pushed economically underprivileged areas to support the idea of putting Britain first. With that being said, the question is, has anything changed? Well, it certainly has. However, if you asked if things changed for the better, that'd be a trickier question to answer. Leaving the single market didn't immediately guarantee better deals with countries in the free market, although according to the Institute of Economic Affairs, the UK didn't see a significant drop in goods exports to countries within the EU. Understandably, the only major dip came in 2020 at the time of Brexit, so the Remain group's concern that Brexit would plummet the UK's economy was an overreach. Interestingly, so was the Leave group's claim that Brexit would open up a new world of economic prosperity for the UK. But could the UK have done better if it stayed in the EU? For that, we have to look at another chart which plots the UK's trade with the EU and the rest of the world. While joining the free market has improved the UK's trade with the rest of the world, the EU isn't the UK's largest customer, as some Leave campaigners had hoped. If anything, trade with the EU has been stagnant, often dipping down but never seeing a noticeable boom. That being said, trade between EU member nations has gone up significantly. This showcases how, should the UK have remained in the EU, maybe it would have benefited from the boom just the same. You could argue that the UK offset a potential loss by increasing trade with the rest of the world. However, the UK only managed to offset the real loss it incurred when it stopped trading in a single market. Moving on to an economic area where there has been a very noticeable change, something that many voters and campaigners didn't really take into account during the referendum. Gross domestic product, GDP. Since 2018, the Centre for European Reform has estimated Brexit's economic impact on the UK, with updates extending to June 2022. Using the doppelganger method, which constructs a hypothetical UK economy from a mix of similar countries, CER found that Brexit reduced the UK's GDP by 5.5%, investment by 11%, and goods trade by 7% by the second quarter of 2022. This economic slowdown has led to higher taxes, with annual tax revenues needing to be around $40 billion higher than they would have been without Brexit. The CER defended its approach, noting that the doppelganger method offers a robust comparison by selecting countries based on economic similarity rather than geographical proximity. The analysis shows that Brexit has resulted in slower economic growth and higher taxes. If Brexit had not occurred, many of the tax increases announced by then-Chancellor Rishi Sunak in March 2022 might not have been necessary. The slow economic growth post-Brexit has impacted public finances significantly, as the economy's shortfall necessitated higher taxes to fund public services. The impact of Brexit on the UK's economy has persisted despite the reopening of economies post-COVID-19. The goods trade shortfall has decreased slightly, but the overall negative effects remain significant. In 2018, 2 years after the Brexit announcement was made and 2 years until it officially took place, the International Monetary Fund released a detailed analysis of how Brexit could affect the EU's economy. The article noted that the UK was one of the EU's largest financial contributors and had been a major job market for other EU states. Frictionless agreements between the UK and, at the time, other EU member states meant that migrant workers could travel to the UK, work and earn there, send back money home, and improve both economies in some ways. Financial ties between the UK and the EU were substantial, with bilateral capital flows amounting to around 52% of EU 27 GDP in 2016. Migration also grew, notably affecting countries like Ireland. The article stated that dismantling these integrations post-Brexit would negatively impact long-term output and employment in the EU. Reversing this integration would reduce income and employment in the EU. Under a standard free trade agreement with low tariffs but high non-tariff barriers, EU 27 real output was projected to be 0.8% lower and employment 0.3% lower in the long run compared to a non-Brexit scenario. In 2018, at the time the article was published, the question was if the UK and the EU would default to World Trade Organization rules. Then what? The long-term decline in real output could have been 1.5%, with a 0.7% drop in employment. Under WTO rules, the output loss for the EU 27 could reach 0.5%, with Ireland's output dropping by 4%. These projections only consider long-term impacts, assuming full adjustment to the new relationship. Brexit's impact, however, was studied not just with the coalition as a whole, but with each country. Understandably, it was expected that the impact would vary in each case. Those trading heavily with the UK were believed to experience greater economic hits. Using a country-specific framework, the study showed that under an FTA scenario, EU 27 real output would be 0.2% lower in the long run compared to no Brexit, with Ireland facing the largest impact, a 2.5% reduction in income. Other possibly affected countries were believed to be the Netherlands, Denmark, Belgium, and the Czech Republic. There has been a significant reduction in the number of EU nationals working in the UK, particularly in sectors like hospitality and agriculture. The Office for National Statistics reported that the number of EU nationals in employment fell by 200,000 from June 2020 to June 2021. But that's not to suggest that this is a grim thing. Sure, this could be assessed as 200,000 lost job opportunities, but only within the UK. Outside of it, the EU has created more jobs post-Brexit, or more accurately, the UK helped create more jobs in EU member states after Brexit. A better way to look at this would be through Kiran Tawadi's eyes. Kiran founded her organic tea company, Hampstead Tea, in the UK. In an interview with the Financial Times discussing how Brexit impacted businesses in the UK, Kiran revealed that the Leave group underestimated the true effects of their decision. She stated that in 2020, at the time of Brexit, business owners were convinced the true sovereignty started now. However, when Hampstead received its first post-Brexit order a few months later, that's when she realized the business was about to suffer. The single market was one of the most compelling arguments for both sides at the time of the referendum. Those who wanted to stay in the EU argued that frictionless trade was better than anyone could imagine. Those who wanted to leave, however, believed it was a deterrent for the UK's economy. Saying it is or isn't a lot more complex, but in Hampstead Tea's case at least, it has become a challenge to trade now that the UK has entered the free market. Previously, trade with member nations was easy, as shipments from the UK would reach other countries within a week's time, possibly two. Now packages were being kept in custom houses for months at a time because of trade barriers and tariffs. Brexit took place in January 2020, and by 2021, Kiran decided that the trade barriers were costing the company more money than anticipated. The simplest solution was to create headquarters within an EU state, send large shipments to the location, and trade with EU member nations from there. This effectively reduced costs as far as trade barriers were concerned. However, it didn't help the UK's economy as substantially as Leave campaigners had hoped. Hampstead Tea is just one example, by the way. Several other companies decided to shift their operations outside of the UK and set up bases in EU member states. They reasoned that for smaller or medium-sized businesses, it was a death sentence to have to navigate customs and shipping with 27 different countries when they could previously just send parcels in the post without much of a hassle. This in turn also created jobs in EU member states as a direct result of Brexit, while the jobs might not offset the 200,000 net jobs that EU migrants could have held in the UK. Speaking of offset, you'd assume that the UK has 200,000 vacancies now and could improve its economy by giving those jobs to locals. It was one of the main arguments for leaving, after all, creating a UK that championed the rights of UK nationals above all else. One of Boris Johnson's claims at the time of Brexit was that leaving the EU could create more high-paying jobs for UK nationals. While there are undoubtedly vacancies in several sectors now, notably the agriculture and hospitality sectors, the people of the UK aren't readily taking them up. Why? Because this was just one part of the claim. The other, arguably more compelling aspect was higher wages. That hasn't happened. Wages haven't been significantly increased in a post-Brexit world, and that has a lot to do with economic downturns that happened as a result of COVID-19, and the world effectively shutting down. In hindsight, in 2021, the UK wasn't only navigating as a post-Brexit nation, it was also dealing with a global pandemic. With the UK, the EU had a population of approximately 513 million. Without it, they now have 447 million. The budget has taken a hit, but the GDP has only gone down from 31,000 with the UK to now 30,000 per capita without it. So who won here? The obvious answer is that the EU managed to sustain itself much better, even with the UK's exit, than the other way around. But did it win, or did the UK really lose? Tell us what you think in the comments.